Welcome to the Week 4 Slate Breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbo. With me is Russell Clay, talking every position before FanDuel and DraftKings. And overall, Week 3 was interesting. I mean, we're starting to kind of get a little bit more sample sizes. We're starting to kind of figure out where things are going. You mentioned on the salary exploitation that things are just not solidifying as quickly as they have in the past. But some things are. I mean, we definitely have some takeaways after Week 3.
There are certain takeaways. I mean, I think we're definitely seeing older quarterbacks struggle to continue on the pace they had set earlier in their 30s. Flacco, Roethlisberger, Carson Palmer, those types. Cutler looked, after a decent week 1, looked pretty awful. So I think that's going to be ugly. Rivers, especially if he doesn't have Melvin Gordon this week, we disagree on this one, but he's kind of looking uncomfortable too. We need him to get Mike Williams back, that's for sure.
Yeah, another weapon on the outside of Keenan Allen, because they're not using Hunter Henry. Like that's pretty established that they're just not going to use him in a full role.
So those are the types of things I think we can tell who's not being used. Austin Hooper had a really special week 1.
2 targets, and that's it.
Clearly, they still favor Taylor Gabriel, clearly favor Muhammad Sanu still. So I was kind of hoping those secondary pieces would get pushed aside. Not looking like that. I think we're going to see 40 to 50 total targets for Hooper this year, which is fine, but not what I wanted, certainly.
No, and Cam Newton, bad. Injured.
Hashtag. He's good for Christian McCaffrey, good for Curtis Samuel, not good for their offense.
No, definitely not. Interesting move by DraftKings this week, taking away the Sunday night football game. Obviously, that's kind of been a hot topic, obviously with the increased rake as well. But let's talk the Sunday night game. Are you happy that they've taken that off the board, or are you not?
Personally?
Yeah.
I much prefer it because then I don't have to sweat out the Sunday night game. I just know at 7:30 what's going on. But, taking away that other game kind of just is a weird move. I don't know why you would do that,
When I look at the prize pools, when I look at the huge tournaments that they're putting out, I want the variations. I want the extra players to kind of pivot to. If we look back, we wouldn't have had Chalk Ty Montgomery week 2 if that game, wasn't played, or we wouldn't have had a lot of options. And Sunday night for me, I mean, that's when the sweats happen, like you can fade that game if you want. But for me, I mean, that's what they've already gotten rid of the Monday night game, which I'm fine with. Keep it strictly Sunday. I'm cool with that. But man, I don't know. I think
personally, for my style, which is to sweat out literally every single pass, it's much better for my health that I don't have to wait for another game that's 4 hours and sweat that out as well before I can know how the day went, but certainly a weird move that shouldn't have happened. I don't understand it, but either way, interesting week.
Yeah. That last week and then this week, let's move on here. Let's just jump into it. I mean, quarterbacks, this is a weird week at quarterback because I don't feel like there's a lot of options. I think this is a week where my player pool in general and what I'm going to be pulling through is going to be very small, especially at quarterback. I think obviously you and I are in agreement that Tom Brady is just the clear-cut number 1, and that's probably going to be the case week in and week out.
Yeah. Do any of our viewers need us to talk about Tom Brady? No? Okay, good. All right. We're not going to do that. He's a cash play, even on FanDuel. On DraftKings, he's $8K, but $8K isn't that expensive. It's expensive for the new way they price quarterbacks, but not really in the grand scheme of things. So YOLO there. What about the other, and I'll put in quotations, high-priced guys? I mean, they have listed the top 5 to 6 guys on DK are Ryan, Wentz, Mariota, Rivers, Prescott. Do you like any of those guys?
Doesn't that just say basically how awful this week is at quarterback? Like,
yeah.
I nothing against Mariota, nothing against Wentz or Ryan, but it just, Ryan at 7,400, we haven't really seen a big upside game out of him in quite some time. The yardage is there. He's got to crack that 300 mark for him to really get that bonus, which I like. But I don't like these guys. I feel like Wentz is underpriced or overpriced. I don't know, man. I think it's Brady or bust in this top tier. And then for me, if I'm going cheap, I'm going below 6K with some guys and rather taking some shots there.
Fair enough. So I think the way I'm going to play this is get some exposure to Julio. Not really worry about Matt Ryan as much. Play Ertz again. That's kind of what I've been doing with Wentz, and that's kind of been working out. Mariota, I like. I think he's an interesting play at 6,400 on DK. Also only 7,700 on FanDuel. So I like him quite a bit. I'm not too worried about Houston's passing, defense. Obviously, they have some nice guys who can rush the passer, but with Mariota, I think he can, sneak away from that. Inter-division rivalry, so they know each other pretty well. I think you can figure that one out there. Maybe play some Delaney. Dak Prescott, no thanks.
Oh, no thanks. I like Mariota and GPPs this week. I'm with you. You mentioned the front seven, obviously not bad. More of the front four. I think the linebacker core is hurting a little bit, but this secondary is banged up. We saw New England obviously take advantage of it. Mariota's sneaky. He's going to be a low ownership play. He has the rushing upside with his legs. Could have had a rushing touchdown this past weekend. But, that was a team that hung 33 on Seattle. I don't think Houston's really scaring anyone off at this point. Mm-hmm. The only thing you really wish was that game was at home for Tennessee. But, I'm with you. I think Mariota's a good play. I don't mind Wentz, in a GPP. I don't mind these guys in GPPs. The only one I just don't think I'm going to get exposure to is probably Ryan.
Wentz is such a gunslinger, man. He doesn't care at all. He's just throwing to Alshon down the field, throwing to Ertz everywhere. It's great. I love it for fantasy purposes. Pittsburgh, Baltimore feels like a stay away to me. What's your take on that?
Yeah, by far, as far as the quarterbacks go, Roethlisberger, like you said, we just haven't really seen that out of him. I was buying it a little bit in tournaments in the first 2 weeks, but I'm on the road here. I do like Russell Wilson, 7,900. He's been a guy that's been tricky to figure out. But with the Colts, and they just don't have much of a pass rush, like Doug Baldwin's expected to be fine. 4 touchdowns last week, 373 yards. I could actually see a decent game out of him, and he's only 7,900 on FanDuel.
Mm-hmm. How about Deshaun Watson? I know I'm going low. We were supposed to go to the middle tier, but what's your take on Deshaun Watson? Because he's shown in the first few weeks that he's got the ability to run, face some pretty tough defenses other than New England. I think he has some upside in that offense. He still has Hopkins, and especially for future weeks, when he gets Will Fuller back, he's got some guys who can make some plays for him. So with the running, yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you. 8 for 41, 5 for 67, and a touchdown, 2 for 16. That was only a half of football.
Yep.
Dude, 5,100 on DK, that's a nice price because, it's not a Kaiser week in that matchup against Cincinnati. Brissett's off the table. There's not cheap options really this week. So, yeah, I definitely don't mind Watson.
So, and the big question this week is going to be, we know Cam is awful right now. Obviously, the shoulder injury clearly limiting him at this stage. Are you playing him against New England because the matchup is so good?
No.
Because you got into trouble with that last week. Maybe you just play the pieces around him. That might be – and it's pretty easy now if Benjamin's out. You just kind of roll with McCaffrey, right?
Yeah, I think McCaffrey's probably the play. Like, I don't like Funches that much. I don't like Ed Dixon. This is just not a good team. And honestly, I could see Cam getting pulled in the fourth again because the Patriots are up by 30 points.
Yeah. The only problem with McCaffrey is he's 6,800 on DK now. That's harsh.
That's high, man.
Yeah, that's harsh. But yeah, I agree. It's a play. Like, he's super cheap, but I just think he's still stay away right now with how he's played. Any other mid-range guys you're looking at? I think Jameis might be an interesting guy to stack with Evans this week.
I don't know, man. Like, for me, if Janoris Jenkins shadows Evans, I'm off. I just don't like targeting him. If not, I'd be surprised if he doesn't. I think that's the play. I like Deshaun Jackson as a dart throw. I think he's interesting, especially given the fact that we saw Wentz and Jeffrey nearly connect for a couple of big plays. Wentz just missed him. I think it's interesting. I don't think I need to go Winston this week. I think if you want to go, you just go Jackson. If you want to play Evans, you can play Evans. The guy that I'm actually somewhat interested in is like these lowering guys of like Andy Dalton, Trevor Siemian, Tyrod Taylor, like all really cheap. And I think there's like 250-yard, 2 to 3 touchdown potential there, like in good spots. Those are the good spots, guys, because we don't – Roethlisberger not in a good spot, Dak Prescott not in a good spot, Stafford not in a good spot. Like some of these guys that we've been talking about the last few weeks, they're not really playable for me this week.
Stafford in play for me just because I feel like he's been fantastic so far this year, but tend to agree it's definitely not a plus matchup. Definitely going with Dalton. You like the lower tier guys a little more than me. Is that because you're looking at running back, wide receiver, tight end, and you want to pay up more, or is that just because of how the positions are or how the quarterback position looks?
I just don't I rather save the extra $1,000 or $500 because like when you really look at it, I mean, does Stafford have 4 touchdown upside? You know what? I'm not going to rule that out. Like it's a tough matchup on the road, but I'm curious to see who Xavier Rhodes takes on this week, because if he's on Tate, that's a big like that. I don't target Xavier Rhodes, and quarterbacks don't either, and they just like that's a big loss if they take him out. And I think I don't know if they work things like last week and Dalvin Cook and kind of just run this game out. Stafford worried me in that first half with Freeman. I mean, they ran the ball a ton. They controlled the clock. Stafford, I believe they only had 24 offensive plays in the first half. That was scary.
It was bad. And if teams can push around that defense like that all year, it's going to be problems. Definitely don't disagree, and that's a fair point. I don't know. I just think Stafford, man, I'm really impressed with how much better he's gotten from a few years ago. He was not very good post Calvin that first year. I mean, I know completion percentage was good, but so moving on to running back here. And I guess with the way running backs have gone this year and last year, does that affect the way we look at quarterbacks? Do we go with more of a streaming type thing and then just load up on running backs? Like we're talking about all these guys. The guys that are winning things this year are like Jacoby Brissett, Deshaun Watson, like all these guys who run and are super cheap. Kaiser. I don't know. Is that viable, especially with how the macro stats are breaking out with the NFL this year?
I think so, man. I think that's going to be the approach. I mean, it's kind of been that way. Obviously, on FanDuel, everything's a little bit different. DK, you're kind of forced to make a tremendous move where you have to designate salary to one position way much over the other. And when you kind of look at things, I mean, this is another week where there's some guys in good spots. You know, I like McCoy. Ezekiel Elliott's going to be probably my favorite guy that I lock and load this week against the Rams. And, you know, you kind of get into these other guys of McCaffrey. Fournette's a guy that I know you like quite a bit. Joe Mixon's in there. So, I mean, there's some cheaper mid-range guys to use. But for me, I mean, I think you got to have one of the clear-cut top guys. And if that means paying down a quarterback, like I said, I mean, it's Brady or bust at the top. And then after that, I'm just kind of skipping over that middle tier and just kind of going with those guys.
So you can sneak in another Cook or Hyde or Fournette in your flex, right? I mean, that seems to be the way to go early on in the year, play that third running back in the flex. So it's certainly something to think about from a macro sense on lineup building. So high-end guys, I like, as you mentioned, Zeke. You know, I think McCoy is a very interesting play. I think those two are kind of the cash game guys. But then I don't know. I might like paying down more so than getting those guys even. I feel like, you know, you can save $2,000 on McCoy going down to Dalvin against Detroit. I think that's an interesting, you know, obviously you can roster both, but if I had to choose, I think I'd probably go Dalvin, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think when you look at him, I think he's reasonably priced for that workload. I mean, well, we're looking over 30 touches last week. He finally got that touchdown. It's just that's what they're going to do. And I think at home, and that's what worried me about Stafford is, can they do that again? And I think they can. So, if you're high in Cook, I'm not exactly really high in the Detroit passing game. And I think when you look at things, I think the McCaffrey McCaffrey Cook, Mixon, those guys are really in range, and they break off those touchdowns and get 20 plus touches. I mean, Bell's not a great play this week. McCoy, obviously, there's still not, there's a little bit of question mark behind him. I think Elliott's the guy that he's my number one this week. And the rest, I kind of do like paying down a little bit more.
Fair enough. I think you're looking at least getting one of those high-end guys in, one of the mid-tier in, maybe even the two of them in. I think playing 3 running backs this week on DK is pretty much the optimal move. Let's talk about the high end on FanDuel. Le'Veon only 8,600. Are you biting that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you got to get your exposure. He still hasn't really been all that efficient. This is still a road matchup against Baltimore. They just got torched. I know they're coming back, obviously, from London. For me, it's still Zeke. This Rams team, they've allowed 417 rushing yards this season. They've allowed 6 rushing touchdowns, too. And if you don't think that Zeke's going to touch the ball 25-plus times here, it's just such a good spot at home against one of the better lines in the league. And, I mean, this is a good spot here for Zeke to just kind of plug him in and use him at will.
Yeah, I definitely agree. In terms of the top end, are you looking at Freeman at all against Buffalo, or is that kind of a fade with Zeke and McCoy right there?
No, I think Freeman's in play. Season high 24 touches last week, 140 all-purpose yards. He scored in every game this year. Bills' run defense isn't bad. You got to keep an eye on those injuries. They missed Marcel Darius last week. If he's back, obviously that strengthens things up a little bit, but I mean, if you look at things here, I think Freeman's an interesting pivot off of Zeke, and McCoy's interesting too because he's actually carried a pretty good floor despite having some bad yardage games. In his targets out of the backfield, 6, 6, and 7, which is obviously a plus note when you look at Atlanta against pass catching backs. So Freeman's third on my list, but I'm definitely using him in a core play this week.
So shout out Rotoviz. Game splits. Bell's had 3 games against Baltimore in the last 3 years. So 2015, 2016. He's actually averaged 1 more point per game against them than he has in his normal splits. So it is a tough matchup. I just think interdivision, they kind of know each other. They'll probably be able to figure it out. Like you mentioned, I think there's just other really good plays on the board. So, I don't know. Where are we going next?
Should we talk? I mean, let's talk Joe Mixon real quick. Okay. FanDuel, I mean, we talked about him salary exploitation wise. I mean, he's, in that high 5K range on DK, but 5,600 on FanDuel is just a completely different story there. Out touched and out snaps, the rest of the guys under Bill Lazor there. I mean, this is what we're going to get out of him. And, he's been actually really strong in, the receiving game too. I think he's caught all 7 of his targets against this Cleveland team. They've looked a little bit lackluster since that showing up against Pittsburgh. He's the guy where, if you want to play OBJ this week, Zeke this week, Brady this week, Mixon is your RB2 on FanDuel. I just think that's the spot where you save some cash and get a pretty good amount of workload there.
And again, think of his first 3 games: Green Bay at home, Houston, and Baltimore. I mean, that's pretty brutal in terms of run production. In terms of college profile, in terms of college production, in terms of getting drafted in the 2nd round after being, having an enormous issue. I mean, most players would go undrafted with that kind of red flag hanging. He goes 2nd round, already getting snaps. Looked like the feature guy last week. Has a little Le'Veon in him. He was dancing behind the line of scrimmage, but he's athletic enough to take advantage of that. Yeah, I agree with you. Against Cleveland, this could be 20 to 25 points. He has the potential to break a big run, 70-yarder or whatever. So, yeah, especially after what Frank Gore, Frank Gore looked pretty good against them. I think Joe Mixon's much better than Frank Gore at this stage in his career.
Oh,
So,
gee, what a hot take that is.
hey, Frank Gore's still pretty good.
I love Frank Gore.
Yeah.
Hall of Famer.
So, and I think that kind of creates a divide for me in terms of going lower. It's kind of hard to go lower, past Mixon. I mean, you got the hurt Derrick Henry, Mike Gillislee against a pretty tough run D. Tevin Coleman, I like always as a sneaky play because he can always put up those 20-point games, but he's not someone you want more than 1 or 2 shares of. Duke Johnson, kind of fluky. Buck Allen, there's not much here. Theo Riddick in a tough matchup. Where are you going here if you are diving down?
I think for me, when I look at things,
Jonathan Stewart maybe at 4,300.
I don't know. He could be out of the freaking game by if you look, I mean, they were down so quick, and I think that's going to be the case again here. Like, I don't care how good that defense is, and they're pretty good. They're not stopping to the point where this game's going to stay close and they can try and run the ball. I think Mixon's the clear-cut guy there as far as FanDuel guys go. James White was kind of a weird one last week, back with kind of a full set of weapons. He only saw 1 target in the passing game.
I think this is, when you're looking at these guys, I don't think there's anyone this week, but I do think there's 2 situations to keep an eye on. Wendell Smallwood in Philly, they're playing the Chargers this week. Very important to watch the snaps between him and LeGarrette Blount last week because he looked good. Smallwood was a 4th or 5th rounder last year, and they really like him. So he could be a guy that by the end of the year really emerges, and you could, just keep an eye on him. Could be a guy that emerges. And Donta Foreman, kind of those fluky dump-off passes last week, but he looks pretty comparable to Lamar Miller at least. So I wonder if they make that a pure committee or maybe even start leaning towards Foreman. We might get a week soon where we get him out of value.
Yeah, I think so. And I think Smallwood's interesting this week. 57% of the touches last week, obviously. 12 attempts, gets 71 rushing yards, 2 targets. I think Blunt's going to be a guy who he's on and off week in and week out. I think Smallwood actually opens thing up. I don't think Corey Clement, even though he had the touchdowns, really going to break through in terms of anything to be worthwhile in fantasy. So it's actually a good matchup for the Eagles running game. Chargers have given up 412 rushing yards over 3 weeks, and that was supposed to be a strong suit. They haven't looked as good on the defensive side of ball as I was expecting this year.
Yeah, and the guys that were kind of fun, like Shane Vereen, since OBJ's gotten back, there's just too many mouths to feed that even as a 3rd down back, he obviously had the 10 targets week 1. That really shifted away when OBJ came back because now those are Sterling Shepard targets now, Yeah,
or Ingram.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think to recap here, I think really McCoy, Elliott, Freeman are your clear-cut, top options. I think Bell, you get your exposure to Bell still just because we've seen bad matchups before where he's breaking 150 all-purpose yards and 2 touchdowns.
I love Gurley, but I think those guys are clearly preferable to them. I think you can get exposure again. Not touching Gordon at all. He's a stay away with that injury, I think. And yeah, McCaffrey, Fournette, Hyde. I like Hyde a lot. I think he could be sneaky with that price tier.
Yeah, I know. We talked. I mean, Arizona, their run defense isn't as good as years past.
They lost Calais Campbell. He's in Jacksonville now, and I think you're seeing, some shifting results. Jags look a lot better against the run. I think he's the main reason why. So might be a different Cardinals team this year, Might just not be that great defensively other than Peterson and Matthew.
Yeah, no, I agree. Let's talk wide receiver here. Let's break things down. Top options. You got Odell Beckham, who's clearly fully healthy now, looking back to his usual self. Antonio Brown, tough spot against Baltimore. Julio Jones, a little bit banged up. He's dealing with a back issue, expected to be fine. These guys are expensive. I don't know how much exposure. I think OBJ is actually my guy if I'm going anyone here.
I guess my question for Antonio Brown is, Does matchup matter at all? I
No.
guess week two did. I guess week two did.
Xavier Rhodes, dude, he is a
Yeah,
guy you
he's
just don't target.
so is Baltimore that good? Xavier Rhodes good?
No,
I don't know.
I don't think
It's
so,
kind of
man.
tough. It didn't seem like, I mean, Higgins kind of got free week one, and then obviously, last week Lee and Hearns kind of didn't have much resistance either. So let me look up the splits. You talk about some of your other favorites.
Yeah, OBJ, dude. I mean, Tampa Bay's allowing 12 yards per reception through 2 weeks. They just got cooked through the air against Case Keenum and Stephon Diggs. They've lost 670 receiving yards in 2 games. I mean, Brent Grimes sat out. That was one of the key injuries, I think, in that game. That's a pretty big corner. I mean, OBJ for me. Well, Julio Jones, he doesn't get the red zone look. He's had one red zone target through 3 games here so far. 8,800. I mean, I need those touchdown upsides that he certainly has. But at this point, if Julio Jones is scoring touchdowns, it's coming on a slant, right? That he breaks for 70 yards.
It certainly seems that way. I did see one, one of them that was pretty decent, but in the red zone. But other than that, it's kind of tough to trust here. Okay, so Antonio Brown since 2013 averages 4 less points per game in PPR against Baltimore than everyone else. So that's pretty significant, I'd say. Let's see away. So on the road against Baltimore, yeah, almost 6 points less per game against Baltimore on the road.
Yeah, honestly, I kind of like Martavis Bryant this week.
I think that could be a guy who hasn't broken out yet, kind of frustrating people, low ownership, not a great game. I think that's some good logic there. I like that call.
Like, he was an inch away from a big 70-yard touchdown bomb on Sunday. I
Yep.
mean, 18 targets over 3 weeks here. Baltimore, I mean, they do give up the long ball. Like, we've seen the home run ball go from some of these big guys, and I think Bryant is intriguing. And at 6,100 on FanDuel, I mean, that's not a bad price tag for him. He's only 54. Like, he's only $100 more than Funchess. And I'm not going Funchess, sorry.
No, Funchess isn't as cheap anymore. You certainly am interested by it, but so I agree with you, OBJ. I think you can go at AJ Green again, even at a pretty advanced price, and then Cooks. Not great numbers against Carolina historically, but he did break that big one in 2016 for that long touchdown. So I do think there's something there. What are you going with the mid range here? What are you looking at?
Mid-range, love Keenan Allen this week. Obviously, he's not cheap anymore. He's 7,200 on DK. That price has come up. DeAndre Hopkins, man, 6,400. If you look at that Cincy game, I mean, and even last week, like, is 14 DK points his floor right now? Because he hasn't been below that, and he's had some pretty, not efficient games in terms of like being productive. I mean, didn't find the end zone in the last two. So I like Hopkins this week. 8, 13, 16 targets for him at 6,400. Watson clearly going to be going to him. I know any team that has a brain is going to be just basically trying to defend Hopkins, but volume is just simply trumping everything else right now for him. So I like him at 6,400, especially given the fact I don't like Des Bryant. I don't really like Golden Tate. Stephon Diggs is interesting, but if he sees Darius Slay, I think it downgrades him a little bit.
Definitely. I think Keenan Allen is pretty much the play in that range. I know you like Rivers, but this is probably where I'm going to be getting my exposure to Rivers here with Allen. I think that's pretty safe target share. Not really many other options emerging in that offense. And it just seems pretty straightforward to me that he's going to get, 13 to 17 points at a minimum in this game.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, as far as the New England pass catchers go, is Chris Hogan someone you're going to be looking to? 2 touchdowns last week. I mean, obviously Houston didn't even realize that he was on the field. He was wide open for both. Just 5, 6, and 6 targets over the first 3 weeks. Like, he's an efficient pass catcher. He's not a high volume guy.
Right.
You can't count on those touchdowns every week, and I think he's creeping up into a price where you now need a little bit more touchdown upside. But then again, I mean, if Brady's tossing 4 or 5 touchdowns on a weekly basis, then I guess there's going to be enough to go around.
The problem is in New England this year, there's only so many touchdowns in their game script before they're just blowing teams out. So if they only score, and I say only, 5 touchdowns, they're almost all on big plays. Like Cooks is averaging 26 yards per reception so far this year. Hogan basically just getting huge chunk plays. Gillislee, obviously they use him a lot in the red zone. So unless it's Gronk, in the passing game, you kind of need those big plays for the wide receivers to really hit for you in your lineup. So I think Chris Hogan's going to be a every week play for me, just because, as you mentioned, I mean, there's just going to be weeks where there's so many things bearing down on opposing defenses. You're just going to leave guys open sometimes. So I think that's going to be a thing all year. But yeah, I agree. He's not cheap anymore.
No, he's not. Oh, how do you feel about Denver's wideouts? Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, sitting in that mid-range. Pretty good spot here against Oakland. I think Denver is going to develop some pretty severe home away splits this year. So I'm going to be kind of jumping on board when they're at home, especially Oakland, who I don't actually see them improving all that much on defense coming into this week.
Yeah, I like Demaryius. Obviously had a pretty good game last week, has had a reception 27 yards or more in every game. It looks like not old Demaryius, but still pretty good, post-prime Demaryius. So I'm okay with him. I think Oakland puts up a better fight against an interdivision rival. I just don't think they were ready for what Washington had. Sometimes you just get in bad matchups. Usually Oakland's offensive line is a strength, but Washington looks really strong. And, I just think Oakland's going to put up a better fight in this game. Might be muddied up a little bit. So I don't know that I love offense in that game in general.
You staying away from Crabtree and Cooper.
Yeah, I think you have to.
Especially if Crabtree misses.
Yeah, so Cooper is such an awkward topic because he's clearly good, but there's the ranking of how good is he, and people tried to crown him a little too early. He's only 23. He's only 23. Not everyone's OBJ. So I think we're going to have to give this some time, and this passing game's it's going to be ugly in some bad matchups, I think,
Yeah,
a little inflated right now.
I agree. One more guy in the mid-range that I do want to mention is Adam Thielen. We talked about him on salary exploitation. Much more of a DK play for me at 5,800. I don't hate him though on FanDuel at 64, especially in the range that he's in. Should draw an easier matchup this week, just in terms of not being Stephon Diggs. I like him here. I think he's a reliable wide receiver too in cash and GPPs. I think even regardless, if Keenum, plays or if it's Bradford, I just think under 6K on DraftKings, you're getting a nice bargain for a PPR guy that really has ranking in this type of format. So I like Thielen, 5,800 DK. I don't even mind him on 64 on FanDuel. So he's going to be a guy I think actually I play a fair amount of this week.
Definitely. I think you can get some exposure to Sterling Shepard on DK. Obviously hasn't had a ton of targets this year, but he's clearly the second or third weapon in that offense. So against this Browns team, obviously we saw him break the 70-yard touchdown against Philly. I think we could see one of those against Tampa. So I think that's definitely in play again for him to make a big play. Anyone else in that range?
We talked Marquise Lee, salary exploitation. I think he's a good GPP threat. I don't think Mohamed Sanu should be ignored right now, especially if you're using him as a wide receiver 3. Probably more so on DK. I don't see the need to really drop that low on FanDuel and kind of use him. But 10.7, 13.5, and 12.8 as far as DK point games through 3. Decent spot here against the Bills. The secondary is not as great, I think, as advertised. He's seen 6, 6, and 9 targets over the first 3 weeks, and he's been efficient with 15 catches. Below 5K, those are strong numbers, and I think wide receiver 3 in this offense who's being at home, there's that potential again here for another 15-point game. I know he's not a sexy play, but if you're trying to free up some salary, I think Sanu's one guy to not ignore.
That's a good call. The Browns receivers, like usual, is in a mess. Britt, 10 targets last week. Not a great matchup, but 4,300. I mean, if he gets 10 targets again, is it worth it?
I don't think so in this matchup. That was Indy. This is a better secondary. I mean,
fair enough.
You want to jump into fades real quick? Are you
sure?
No fades, or like I'm not targeting Xavier Rhodes. I'm not targeting Janoris Jenkins. The Jets guys, I know Robbie Anderson, Jermaine Kearse have been fun to start the year, but I'm not going at Bouye or Jalen Ramsey there this week.
I'll just say I'm fading using two high-end receivers this week. I don't see myself doing that pretty much in any lineup. It's one or the other. So I really don't love combining any of these guys unless I'm doing a Beckham, Keenan Allen. So really I'm fading everyone in that range other than Keenan Allen, for better or worse. I'm kind of spreading that out until we get to Cooks. I'm not really going to be playing Evans, Diggs, Bryant that much, I don't think.
No, I don't think so either. And Oakland guys are a fade for me. That's another one that we talked about. So, I think overall wide receiver, I mean, that's pretty much it. It's once again, I think it's a narrow week. If JJ Nelson, if he's still iffy come this week, John Brown as well. I think Jerron Brown's interesting. He saw a ton of targets, and he's a GPP dart throw for me.
Definitely.
Let's jump into tight ends. I think this one's interesting this week because, FanDuel, it's a different story. 8,500 for Gronk, 6,900 for Zach Ertz. Nice there. Tight end over on DraftKings, 66 for Gronk, only 63 for Ertz. Like, there's a $300 difference between Gronk and Ertz, where FanDuel, it's a different story. So how are you approaching that?
Oh, boy. Lots of Gronk, lots of Ertz, not much of anybody else. I know Ertz has been a stud, man. I know he's not as good as Gronk, but with the way Wentz does things nowadays, I think we're going to see – this is definitely the higher end range of Ertz's outcome, but I wouldn't be shocked if he had 140, 150 targets this year. It's just – they're pass first. They don't really have a great running back behind them other than Blount and goal line. So Ertz really is the short passing / running game substitute there. 6,300 on DK. I mean, I think he's worth that price. I think he's a guaranteed 12 to 15 points at this stage.
Yeah, I do too. Ertz is a tremendous PPR tight end. He did find the end zone last week. He's even giving you a decent floor around FanDuel. I mean, 12, 13, 13, but 6,900 for like a 12 or 13. I mean, I want more than that. So I think I'm a little bit iffy on pulling the trigger. Ertz at 13. Gronk, obviously, the week one kind of deflates his overall numbers, but he's been 18 to 20 the last 2 weeks. Like, I know he's 8,500. So I think I kind of like Ertz more on DK. Can we go back to wide receivers just real quick?
Sure.
If Doug Baldwin's out, I know he seems to be fine for this week. Seattle wide receivers are in play against this Colts offense on FanDuel.
So let's talk about the passing game in general. Russell Wilson, are you playing? I think the only way I would get exposure to Walker and Graham is through Mariota or Wilson lineups. I think that's going to be the way I play that. Are you liking either of those as individual plays or just as stacking options?
I like them I like them both ways. I think Graham's interesting. Saw 11 targets last week after burning me, the week before, and the week before that.
Right.
I think he's interesting. If Baldwin's out, I know they're not expecting to be serious, but say he does have a setback, I think Graham's intriguing. Paul Richardson, Tyler Lockett, obviously clearly a cheap bump. I think they become much more playable as wide receiver threes. I don't mind Graham, though. I think either or. I think Graham's actually intriguing at 6,200, especially for that late game. I think a lot of people are going to pay the extra 700 to go to Ertz or just pay down completely. I think Graham people are just done with him.
Paul Richardson is filthy. I mean, the
It
catches.
didn't take long for you. I had mentioned you're like a dog. If Paul Richardson's your treat and I just shake him and you come running.
But I, I don't think he's a great fantasy guy. But whenever he makes a catch, it's like spectacular. And I just Lockett, him and Lockett kind of cancel themselves out. I do agree. I think Lockett's more likely to have the big play. For whatever reason, Richardson doesn't seem to run away from guys. He just makes big contested catches, and that's not as optimal for big plays like Lockett. He seems to be the big play, like 60-yard touchdown type guy. So I kind of prefer him there, even though I love my man. But yeah, I mean, they're all in play. Sure.
All right. Back to tight ends. I'm with you. I think Ertz, Gronk are clear-cut guys. Anyone in the mid-range, you kind of started talking about Witten. Witten's been heavily used so far this year. I don't think it's sustainable. So I think
very, very confusing.
With the higher price tag, I mean, can you really go 5,700 on FanDuel? Sure, not bad. 5K on DK. I know he's been good. I know he's been targeted heavily, but this is a game I see Prescott like throwing like 23 times.
Right. And I think what we're seeing is what the Cowboys offense would look like if they're bad, but they're not bad. They're not bad. Their run game just hit some stumbling blocks. So I think they'll look good. It is something to note if Zeke gets suspended, though, the increased Witten usage, but not for this week. Hunter Henry, clear fade, just non-existent in terms of passing game rule. They're going back to Gates. No thanks with Cook against Denver. Jack Doyle, seems like Brissett's found his man, and that's going to be how that goes.
Yeah, so what does that leave us with? Like,
playing Seattle's D.
Let's tight end. I don't think it's that great of a position this week, and I think that's why I talked about really cheap guys, because really if you're not going Gronk or Ertz, but I think if you're going them, you are shifting your lineup construction to not pay up at other positions. Like you're going with a balanced approach because there's not a lot of like bare min, wide receiver threes out there.
All right. I got the solution for you, bro. You can just throw Eric Ebron in there. You're all set.
Oh, I'm doing that again. Yeah, I learned my heavy exposure lesson to Ebron, but
never
I like
again.
Charles Clay, man. I just think he's still cheap, and he's 18 targets for 3 weeks, 2 red zone touchdowns. Like he's been fine over the last 8 weeks going back to last year. I think at 3,700, it's still fine. He's creeping up in price a little bit, but still 5,300. Like, would you rather play Cameron Brate, Jack Doyle, Eric Ebron? Kyle Rudolph I could actually see this week.
No Kyle Rudolph. No.
What about Evan Ingram?
I like Evan Ingram. I tweeted this today. Evan Ingram actually on pace for 700 plus receiving yards this year, has had a role every week. So he's not really a tight end. He's like a receiving down player. So I do think he can have a role this year. Marshall obviously had 11 targets last week, but he's just not very good. He's not very good.
He's over the hill.
So I think Ingram's a guy they're going to continue to look to against Tampa. I mean, sure, 5,200. I'm fine with that. Can't go with Hooper. Not going with Joku. There's just not much here, honestly. I feel so much safer with Gronk or Ertz. I don't know. It's tough.
Yeah, I think if I'm honestly not going with those guys, or maybe like one of the middle tier guys with Clay, and I need that extra savings, Austin Seferian-Jenkins, bare min. I know the matchup's not great against Jacksonville. They got a pretty good set of core of linebackers and safeties, but he's the potential number 2 weapon in that offense. And they have a quarterback that's capable of at least getting the ball out and 2 receivers in a timely and somewhat accurate fashion. And I would not be surprised if he gets another 5, 6, 7 targets again this week while their wide receivers are locked up. So I think if you're paying up at running back, you're trying to lock in, trying to force some of those higher price guys, you can't go Gronk or Ertz. So I think you have to pay down.
And hear me out. So there's a less than 0% chance Mercedes Lewis ends the year as a top 10 tight end. Like, And obviously that says something about how bad the position is, but also, I mean, Mercedes Lewis is not a nobody. He's had a 10 touchdown season before. He was a first round pick. He's got the athletic profile. He's got everything. He just was used as a blocker. So without Allen Robinson, with no real primary receiving option, that's something to monitor. I'm not saying roster him, but maybe throw one in there against the Jets. You know, I'm not saying don't do it. And you know what I'm pissed about? No Vernon Davis on the main slate. That stinks.
That's a bummer.
Yeah, that's a bummer, man.
Because Eric Berry was the glue that held that Chiefs defense together in terms of not playing tight ends against them, and he's out and they're much more vulnerable.
So I think the people got the gist of how we feel about tight end this week.
Yeah, you have unlimited salary and you can fit in whoever you want with All right, so let's move on to defense here. I'm going to be very narrow with defense. I think there's probably two teams that I like, and then maybe a third in GPPs. For me, it's Jacksonville and Cincinnati, and I think the third one is a contrarian Arizona because I actually don't think they're going to come in all that popular.
Yeah, I kind of like Hyde in that matchup,
and I think that's what will keep people from playing them, you know?
Yeah, you might have an advantage on that for sure. Again, Eagles corners are terrible, but I kind of think they're intriguing against Rivers, you know, especially with Timmy Jernigan there. They can definitely get some pressure. So, you know, there's not much out there. I mean, Jameis Winston can always throw pick six. Same with Eli. I think that game could definitely see that game's like classic pick six potential for one side. Like I could see Eli legit throwing 2 pick sixes, or I could see him throwing for 350 yards and like being a weird, you know, Eli game. It's such a weird Eli game, this one.
Is it Jacksonville number 1 this week?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. They're the chalk. They're going to be the chalk, deserve to be the chalk. I'll have most of my exposure to them.
Yeah, I will too. I don't even feel like they're all that expensive when everything's said and done.
That's such a high floor. Obviously, Tennessee isn't a good example, but, you know, the Jets are just so bad.
Is Denver in play for you in GPPs? I kind of like them, especially if Crabtree's out. Like, the running game is only going to work some weeks. It's not going to be this week. If they're losing a weapon, that offensive line is not supposed to cave in like that. I don't expect anything similar to that for the rest of the year. But I think Denver is actually somewhat intriguing. At 4,800, they're not really that expensive. They're back at home where they just, you know, they completely play, different. And you look, I mean, 13 points against Dallas. They struggled a little bit against, San Diego at home. I kind of like them. They might be a defense that nobody's talking about when really everyone's always talking about them.
I'll say this. I don't know. Hold on, I lost it. I got to get it back. Oh, yeah, okay. I feel like that says more about the Redskins defense than it does about the Raiders offense. That's kind of what that game felt like to me yesterday. It felt like the Redskins went in there and just demolished the Raiders. And that's not totally the Raiders' fault. Redskins drafted, D lineman in the first round, linebacker in the second, and added to a really strong front seven. So maybe they're just really good. I'm not out on Carr, but obviously another tough front seven at home. So yeah, I'm with you, but interdivision always gets weird.
But it's always a low scoring weird for me. Like when you talk interdivision, it's usually somewhat high scoring interdivision games are like 24-20.
Yeah, that's true.
It. So yeah. I'm with you. I think, they're an option this week, but I think Jacksonville, Cincinnati. I mean, Jacksonville's 5,200 on FanDuel. That's, obviously somewhat pricey. So I think if you need the savings of 800, Cincinnati right there at 46 is a great move.
I'm so used to plugging in team against St. Louis or Los Angeles, and we can't do that anymore. It's a weird feeling.
The Dallas Cowboys, their defense is
bad. Not great.
Yeah, I'll stop there. But New England, their defense isn't good. I don't care if Cam Newton's playing with no arms. I just don't think they really have the upside.
Fair enough. Yeah, my crusade on them being a good fantasy defense is over. I'm all set.
Yeah, I'm with you. Let's close it up. Lineup construction thoughts early on here. For myself, I think, if I'm looking to get the Ezekiel Elliott, looking to try and get, the Keenan Allen, Gronk types guys in my lineup, I think I'm paying down at quarterback. If I'm looking to go the balanced approach, I think you find it with Fournette. I think you find it with Joe Mixon and kind of go from there, and get that Brady, maybe a one higher price guy in there at wide receiver. So I think those are my two kind of main ways of going this week, because there's not really a lot of punts outside of Mixon on FanDuel at 56. So it's going to be a narrow week for me. I didn't have as much to talk about in terms of various plays.
I think this is a great week for wide receiver punts, because if you can find the wide receiver under 4K that gets 10 points, you have a great spot. Quickly, let's go through them. Travis Benjamin, Nelson Aguilar.
Jordan Matthews? There's going to be one Jordan Matthews game soon. He's close to breaking the 70-yard and touchdown score, and no one has him.
I think you're right. And so it's just tough. I think you need to find, if you want to get those two running backs, Keenan Allen, Brady Gronk in there, that's kind of the base construction I'm looking for this week. So you got to find those punts, really. One base wide receiver and fade the rest.
Yeah, that's true. I'm with you. Overall, I think this is an interesting week. Do you expect it to be high scoring? I think it's going to be somewhat mid. I don't think it's going to be as high scoring.
It's going to be high scoring, but it's going to be really spread out other than the running backs. The wide receiver's super volatile right now.
Yeah, I think wide receiver is where you get your contrarianness in, because I think running backs I'm going to be playing it safe with basically the Elliott, Mixon, Fournette. Mm-hmm. I think those are my three that I use the heaviest of this week.
Definitely.
So, any parting words? Anything else you want to mention here?
Matt Collins starting to get some of the snaps in Philly. If he continues, maybe he gets a few more snaps or an injury happens. Big play waiting to happen. Not this week.
Okay. I'm just going to echo my thoughts towards the end of the stat exploitation. Be aware of defensive injuries once again. That's a spot where you can take advantage where people don't usually look, and it can lead to bigger plays that you weren't on if guys in the middle are out or corners are out.
Oh, if Macklin is out or hurt, Rashad Perriman's 3K.
Stop broadcast. Stop broadcast.
Yeah. No, get out of here. Edit that out.
All right, that's it. That's going to wrap it up here. You can head over to dailyfantasycafe.com, check out all of our Week 4 content that's rolling out daily throughout the week. And if you like what we're doing here, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe as well. And good luck in Week 4.